Farm Basics is brought to you by the Liberty Link trait and Liberty herbicide from Bayer. The most reliable weed management solution, Liberty Link and Liberty herbicide are the link to efficient row crop production and sustainable weed management.
During our Farm Basics time today, we're going to talk about how farmers store grain for a long period of time and how the moisture has to be just right.
Well, okay, we're in a cornfield here, and this corn was harvested. The moisture content was somewhere in the neighborhood of 20% moisture. When you put 20% moisture corn into a bin, it's going to store safely for what, a few days? Maybe. Not very long.
Well, it all depends on the temperature. So there are a lot of things you could get into there, but here's Darren's point. We want to store our corn between 13 and 15% moisture, somewhere in there, and then it's usually pretty safe. The other thing that we're talking about in addition to moisture is the temperature. We'd like to have the temperature down somewhere between 35 and 45 degrees to store over the course of the wintertime and through the spring.
Okay, so when we think about that, let's go back to that corn example. Corn comes out of the field at 20, but we're going to put it into the bins at 13 to 15%. How does that happen? Well, what farmers are going to do is they're going to actually dry that corn. Now, not every farm is set up with a corn dryer, but many farms are, especially guys that have been raising corn for a long time. The challenge is they may not have enough bins, so they're probably gonna have to take some of it to town, and the grain elevators in town that are gonna buy the corn from farmers definitely have the capabilities of drying that grain so they can control their storage conditions. But let's just take the example of our farm. So we'll harvest this corn, we'll haul it back to our home grain bin site, and we've got corn dryers there that Brian likes to stay up all night during the fall. It's just one of his fun things that he gets to do on the farm, and watch these dryers. So how much fun is that, Brian?
Well, it's a lot more fun now that we have good systems on there. So we put this system on from AgriDry that allows me to monitor our dryers remotely. I really like being able to control things remotely and just see where everything is at. The other thing that we can do is control fans. So there are two ways that you're going to dry this grain down. One, you're putting air on it, and two, you're putting heat on it. Okay, so we're gonna put a lot of heat on the grain. In the case of corn, it's going to be 200, 210 degree heat that we're going to throw at that. So that does cost some money. We heat ours with propane. But if you want to just slowly dry that grain down, you can do it by controlling fans. That's the other thing with that AgriDry system I can do. I've got that system on several different fans on bins. So if I had a bin of corn that was 18% moisture, that fan could kick on when the humidity is right and when the air temperature is right. So very slowly over a long period of time, we could take the moisture out of the grain. But the main thing here is we've got to get the moisture down, and we want to keep the temperature down too, so the grain stores. We get worried about mold, we get worried about other diseases in there. We also do get worried about insects. And by keeping the humidity down, the moisture down, the temperature down, we're in pretty good shape in both regards for insects and especially for diseases.
All right, we also raise a lot of soybeans on our farm, and sometimes those soybeans will be a little too wet. For long-term storage of soybeans, you want the moisture percentage to be at the most 13%, but likely a point or two less than that, so you don't have to worry about those issues like mold and insects. When we were in Brazil a few years back, it was interesting. I mean, you're in Mato Grosso, we were just out way away from anything. And so the farms had to be pretty self-sufficient. And one farm we visited had a large wood-burning dryer for their soybeans. So they would bring wood in, keep this dryer going, and try to take moisture out of the beans. Now they're in a little different situation where we farm in the upper Midwest. Soybeans will dry down naturally out in the field. You can wait, and the soybeans will be the right moisture percentage. You can get them harvested pretty much no problem 99% of the time. In Brazil, they get rain all the time, and they were taking soybeans out of the field around 20% moisture and then having to dry 7 points of moisture out of those beans to be able to store them, sell them, ship them, really any kind of handling after that point. So they had to dry beans every year. And that was just one of the things that went into play for them, where we don't fight that on our farm here.
The other side of this moisture thing is we don't want the grain too dry. If it's too dry, then in effect, we're not able to sell as many pounds to anyone that we are selling it to, the grain elevator, the terminal, whatever it is. So with these systems that we put on our grain bin fans, we actually can pump a little humidity back into the grain. You can't legally put water onto the grain. You can't go and spray water on your grain. But with humid air, you can pump the humid air in And so if you run the fans at the right time of day when the humidity is just right, you can put a little moisture back in. And sometimes we'll get soybeans down to 8 or 9%. We want to bump that moisture percentage back up to the 11 to 13% range.
Well, moisture content in grain is very important, whether you're talking about corn, soybeans, or other crops. So farmers will try to harvest at the right moisture percentage if at all possible, but when conditions go against them, farmers may have to either use heat or use air to try and take that excess moisture out of the grain.
Having the right moisture is important if a farmer is going to be profitable, but so is weed control. We'll tell you how to stop our weed of the week coming up later in the show.